In Sudan, a second attempt at a ceasefire between the army and a paramilitary force has failed. The 24-hour truce was supposed to come into effect at 6 p.m. local time, but several witnesses have reported ongoing fighting. The violence that erupted on Saturday has left thousands of residents trapped in their homes amid dwindling supplies of food and water.
Another apartment building in Khartoum battered by shelling, as plumes of thick smoke above the city signal the fifth day of deadly fighting. Hundreds of civilians have been killed in clashes between the paramilitary group, the RSF, and the country's army. As thousands try to flee the city, others are trapped inside their homes, fearing for their lives.
In regards to food, thank God we had some stacked, but until today, we were starting to run out of some essentials, so he had to go restock. And it's not particularly a great situation because you can hear your brother walking outside the house and you can hear the clashing noise. And you're just like, you're wondering if he's going to come back, was it worth it?
The head of the army and his deputy, the head of the RSF, have shared power in Sudan since 2021 and signed a deal with political parties in December 2022 to forge a path towards civilian rule. However, they disagree on key issues, and these tensions erupted into fierce clashes on Saturday. Kenya's President, William Ruto, is the latest leader to voice concern that the violence could escalate in Sudan and spill beyond its borders.
There is real danger that the escalation of hostilities in Sudan could implicate external, regional, and international actors and degenerate into a security and humanitarian crisis on a disastrous scale.
Several countries are trying to evacuate their citizens from Sudan, but with the main airport in Khartoum closed and also damaged by the fighting, this is proving to be no easy task.
For more, I'm joined now from Khartoum by Khulud Khair, Managing Director at Insight Strategy Partners, a think tank in Sudan. Good to see you again. Now, what are you hearing and seeing in Khartoum today?
There's been very loud bombing for the fifth day running. Today it was particularly bad. It started around 3 to 4 a.m. in different parts of town, and it continued for most of the afternoon. Interestingly, it stopped for several hours, and people would thought maybe the announced ceasefire had worked, but then Arabic language news channels were reporting that the Egyptians had actually come in and rescued some of their soldiers that were trapped here in Khartoum. So actually it wasn't a ceasefire, and actually it was probably the Egyptians coming in that stopped the fighting for a bit.
It's a time of tremendous uncertainty for the people there. Can you tell us what life is like for ordinary citizens in Khartoum at the moment?
Well, it's incredibly uncertain. You don't know when the fighting will stop in general. You don't know when it will stop that day, when the moments of quiet will be. You don't know how long your supplies are going to run out. You don't know how long electricity is going to be there, or if you don't have it, when it's going to come back. You don't know when you're going to see your loved ones who you've been separated from because everyone has been told to stay indoors. You don't know, when you can get back to some kind of normal life. You don't know if you're going to be able to celebrate Eid in a few days, which is the Muslim holiday following Ramadan. So there are lots of uncertainties, and it's driving people's fears.
How big are fears that this will become a full-blown civil war, or would you say that that's already what it is?
It started off, remember this is only day 5, and it started off as military clashes on Saturday, and very quickly the Wall Street Journal today was reporting that Egypt and Libya's General Haftar have already sort of started to take sides, with Egypt supporting, you can just hear a bomb went off behind me, with Egypt supporting the Sudan Armed Forces and General Haftar's forces supporting the paramilitary forces. So already the regional aspect has happened in only 5 days' time. The lifetime of this conflict seems to be developing very, very quickly, and the people of Khartoum simply cannot keep up with that.
Khulud Khair, Managing Director at Insight Strategy Partners, thank you so much for joining us, for sharing your experience, and please be safe.
Thank you.
Matt Nasheed is a journalist covering the region with a focus on Sudan. He joins us now from Cairo. Matt, it seems the ceasefire has already failed again. Why?
Yeah, it's the million-dollar question, and I think there's a number of questions that come out of that. I don't think it's just one answer, but one question that arises from it is how much control does Burhan and Hemeti, or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, who's the other adversary here, how much control do they actually have over their forces? Over the last 4 or 5 years, in which we saw multiple different political processes and phases in Sudan since the former dictator Omar al-Bashir fell in April 2019. Both of these forces, part of their rhetoric in order to try to appeal to Western partners was that they are the legitimate and more credible institution. Right now, neither one looks credible. Both are not able to control their forces, it seems, or worse still, there's not a political will actually to follow the rules of international law. So either way you put it, it's quite damning on both of them.
Yeah, and it seems like a highly complicated scenario to make a ceasefire of any sort work. Do you see any scenario where that could happen?
Yeah, I mean, listen, it's going to come to a point where, ceasefires in themselves, it's also a complex situation. Well, it's incredibly important. In often what happens in conflict is sometimes parties, when they're thinking that they need to restructure or reorganize, this is when they'll feel like they're in a position to concede to a ceasefire. And that's especially the case when you have two adversaries that are so hell-bent on essentially defeating and vanquishing the other. So this is probably one scenario. The other scenario is if one of them gets a considerable upper hand, and then suddenly you see the power dynamics change, and pressure can be exerted more on one individual, while the other one will have to navigate within the losses that they had suffered at that time, and perhaps it could be a ceasefire that arises from that new power dynamic. But I think the thing to consider here is that when a ceasefire does eventually come, we also have to prepare for what both forces are going to try to do militarily to escalate the conflict when fighting resumes again. But yeah, there are potential scenarios, but as it looks right now, it's quite difficult considering A, whether or not they have control of their forces, and B, just considering the power dynamics still seem to be relatively on balance between the two forces at the moment.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was journalist Matt Nasheed joining us from Cairo about the situation unfolding in Sudan. Thank you so much.